Welcome back to Archer's World of Literature. Today we're going to be doing my top 10 favourite books of all time. Books and book series are going to be included. Strap yourselves in, get yourself a coffee, and let's talk some books. So to kick us off, I'm going to start off with the series. The first series I've got is easy. It's a trilogy, The Warlord Chronicles by Mr. Bernard Cornwell. So this is The Winter King, Enemy of God, and Excalibur. So this is a brilliant series. My first introduction to Mr. Cornwell here. This is a historically accurate retelling of the Arthurian legends. It's brutal. It's very military fiction focused. It's shocking. It's devastating. It's heroic. It's exhilarating. So this whole series, starting from this first book all the way to the last one, Excalibur, his writing style doesn't change. The pacing of each book is the same. So when you pick it up, there's no middle book syndrome. Yeah, I'm going to say it right here. Enemy of God was the best one. There was some crazy stuff that happened towards the end. So, middle book syndrome is not a thing. But primarily, this series is actually retold by a character called Derful. Yeah, so Derful's been converted to Christianity by the start, but he's retelling his story as he grew up a soldier with Arthur and Arthur's knights, and how he became Arthur's right-hand man, essentially. And Derful's telling these horrible acts that he did himself, but they were all in the name of Britain, and they were all in the name of Arthur, his king. And this is an incredible story because it's historically accurate. So there's no, when it comes to magic, because there is Merlin, and Merlin has this wonderful character called Nimue. Again, not sure if I'm saying that right. And Nimue is like his little magician apprentice lady sort of thing. But when it comes to those two, they are magic, right? But because it's historically accurate and there's no historical basis for real magic, the magic is alluded to, right? So they'll come in and, all of a sudden all the enemy soldiers will be frightened. So it's historically accurate, and it is so cool because with these illusions of magic, you still get this fantastical feel. So coming in at the number 3 spot for favourite series, we have The Lord of the Rings. So I've just picked up The Fellowship here by Mr. J.R.R. Tolkien, the connoisseur of modern fantasy. The reason why we have many of the fantasy stories we have today is because of this man and this story right here. So in this number 3 spot, I actually did include The Hobbit and the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, so I'm kind of going to lump them together. Not sure if that's a great sin or not, but I'm just going to lump them together and say Tolkien's world of Middle-earth as a series. Obviously, they're all sort of disconnected here and there. What do I need to say about the Lord of the Rings? I don't think I need to say all that much. This follows, it's a typical sort of, and when I say typical, it's actually original because it hadn't been done before much at this point, and now it's sort of done, quite a lot. But it is the story of good versus evil. All creatures, great and small, with humble beginnings, taking down the darkest of evils, and going through Tolkien's ability to quickly and instantaneously teleport you to a fantasy world and make you really feel like that these monsters are real, these giant spiders are real, these ogres, these giants are real. I don't need to go too much about the story, but it's Frodo finds himself with a ring one day, a magical ring, one of the rings of power, and then him and actually one of his family gardener and friend, Samwise Gamgee, they end up getting caught up in this journey to destroy the ring, to go to the darkest places on this planet, which is Middle-earth, and destroy this ring once and for all. But this is one of the greatest books ever written. Coming up at the 2nd spot, we have George R.R. Martin, A Song of Ice and Fire. So obviously this is a pretty big series. The books are quite big, so I couldn't hold all of them in my hand. So I've just gone up and held up a Game of Thrones here, which is the first book in the series. If you've watched the show, you still need to read these books. There is so much in here that the show evaded. Just brilliant content. The way that he does every single chapter, sort of jumping back and forth on a different POV. We have so many characters whose perspectives we see, whereas in the show we kind of see, it's an external perspective. We're seeing these characters all together and stuff, but in here we get all these internal monologues. So if you've watched the show, you still need to read these books because you get a greater understanding for the characters that you already love. You actually get to think what they're actually feeling when they're seeing these situations. When you're watching the TV show and you're seeing externally what's happening with all these characters, in here you get to actually read about what the characters were actually thinking. Obviously the general story, especially in this first one, is pretty much, the series really did this book justice. It really follows the same story. Now, I will be quite candid. I have only read A Game of Thrones and A Clash of Kings, but instantly, his writing style and the world itself. The world is huge. It is absolutely massive. The maps at the front make it, a little bit easier to follow where they're going and stuff. But there's still on this map, the journey they go through in this book is just sort of straight down here, maybe across a couple times. But there's every single place has a name, and so there's so much more to learn. And so this, just in this first book, if the rest of the series hadn't been made, he has been able to, in about 750 pages, create one of the biggest fantasy worlds ever. But just in this one book, right? And there's more to come. Well, more to come. In this one book, he's been able to show us so much. So that is A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. Now, taking the number one spot, I'm a basic guy. Harry Potter. The Harry Potter series is my favorite series of all time. The books, the movies, everything. This is a world that has, ever since I jumped into it when I was probably about 5 or 6, changed my life. My grandma actually bought me she would buy me a secondhand copy of the original covers, the original press. She'd go to a market and she'd find it for me every time a new one had come out and I'd finished one. And that was such a special memory of me and my grandma that meant so much. And on top of that, the world was just like, it's everything that you wish happened to you. My mum would read me, she would tell me these stories when I was going to sleep at night of me being, Harry Potter. She would say I was Archer Potter, right? And she would pretty much retell Harry Potter, but just replace Harry's name with me. And I'm sure that had been the case for many, many kids. And I was able to push this on my sisters when my sisters were old enough to watch the movies and start reading the books. And they love it now. And we got to, play wizard fights and stuff all the time. We'd watch the movies. This series means so much. I really don't need to explain all that much. Harry gets a letter in the mail. He finds out he's actually a wizard and he goes to wizard school. So many books have tried to recreate what J.K. Rowling had done with Harry Potter. And nothing will ever match what she did. It's actually really, really funny that when they tried making the movies, they didn't like this book. They were going to reject it. And then they decided to make the movie and it blew up to, what it was today. But I can't believe that they read this and thought, no, we can't make a movie about that. This book is incredible. For about 300 pages, this is one of the greatest modern children's books of all time. And the fact that people are still being raised on this, and this is still as big as it is a testament to this world. You have no idea how much Harry Potter means to me. This kept me as a young reader. If I didn't have the Harry Potter series, I'd probably be on my iPod or something like that, because as a kid, I did read a lot, but, if it wasn't for this series, I don't know if I would have been as big of a reader as I was. So, thank you to Harry Potter. I adore this series so much. So moving on to the standalones, we're going to start from number 6 and we're going to go down to number 1. My 6th favourite book of all time is Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. This is such a beautiful rendition of one of the first coming-of-age stories. I don't think people sort of overlook this as a coming-of-age story because it's Dickensian, so people sort of analyze it and treat it as something that it isn't. But Oliver Twist follows from the very birth. It actually follows one of the first couple of chapters is actually the birth of Oliver Twist, and then it's him growing up, and then sort of him growing up into this life of crime that he finds himself into, and then how he escapes. So Oliver Twist, we see this boy born. He's born into an orphanage. And it's sort of his life going in and out of the orphanage system, and eventually he's very, very poor, and eventually he finds himself caught up with Fagin and Mr. Bill Sikes, and they are sort of these leaders of this child crime syndicate where they sort of get these kids to run around and pickpocket people in 1800s London. And so they sort of find these. There was a lot of homeless kids on the streets, right? Because when they get old enough and they are able to escape the orphanage system, a lot of them are born into the system. These two sort of sleazy characters who run the syndicate, they sort of groom them into being criminals and getting money for them and stuff. And they do offer them essentially a family that they never had. And so while they are committing crimes, and while Fagin and Bill Sikes aren't good people, they sort of do present themselves as fatherly figures to these. They're rough. They're rough dudes, but they present themselves as sort of family and fatherly figures to these lost children. But anyway, Oliver Twist, from the very start, he's presented as a really innocent and kind boy. When he finds himself on the streets and getting caught up by Fagin and Bill Sikes and caught up into this pickpocketing gang, he really doesn't want to be there, but he sort of gets manipulated into being part of this world, and he sort of gets taken on these criminal runs, and they're doing these home invasions and stuff. And I don't think people give Charles Dickens enough credit for writing actually some pretty dark crime stories. Like, he's talking about, there's police chases and there's these home invasions and people have got batons and all this crazy stuff for like an 1800s writer. It's crazy. But eventually, Oliver Twist, while he's on this home invasion, he observes a family, like a real family, and these people that he really connects with and wishes that he had as a mother. And eventually Oliver Twist, he finds himself escaping this crime syndicate and escaping Fagin and Sikes, and he gets the family that he always wanted. So it's a beautiful story, it's a beautiful sort of redemption story and sort of from rags to riches. But this story means a lot to me because I love Charles Dickens. But the whole time, people accused him of being this criminal and stuff, but, he really had no choice, because if he didn't stick with these guys, he didn't have a family to go back to. And so then that's what makes it so beautiful when he does find this family that he can be a part of, and when he does escape this syndicate, you're really rooting for him. You're really there, and you're really sort of cheering for Oliver Twist. So that is taking the number 6 spot. Oliver Twist, Charles Dickens. Now for the number 5 spot, I don't actually have a copy with me. My actual copy is at my old family house, and I haven't actually picked up the cloth-bound version of it yet. I really need to do that to add it to my collection, as it is my 5th favourite book of all time, and that is George Orwell's 1984. Again, most of these books I'm going to be mentioning, people already know a lot about, especially because a lot of people think we're living in an Orwellian future at the moment. You're following this character who's living in a society where your thoughts are always being controlled and you're always being monitored. And there's this sort of looming figure in the background called Big Brother. And Big Brother is essentially, you never really know who he is, but it's alluded that it's just the government in general. And so there's always this propaganda in the background that Big Brother is watching you. And essentially there's thought police, right? And so everyone in this future has been brainwashed into into only thinking sort of thoughts that the society and the government wants you to think. And as soon as anyone sort of becomes aware of what is actually going on, as soon as the thought pops into your head, the thought police rock up to your door and you're never seen again. Everyone's been brainwashed. That's also seen with the language in the book. English has actually been, it's been slowly and slowly sort of dumbed down. They're actually slowly removing words from the dictionary and stuff, so people have a limited vocabulary. They have a limited ability to think their own thoughts and be independent people. And so basically everyone in the society, they wake up, they go to work, they sort of support the propaganda of the government, and they don't like people who have independent thoughts. So when this guy wakes up one morning and he's starting to have independent thoughts, he's super paranoid that the thought police are going to come and get him because he's woken up and he's having independent thoughts. He's having thoughts for himself. Like, what a surprise. People aren't allowed to have their own thoughts. So it's sort of it's going downhill, but sort of the society is actually stagnant, right? It's not progressing at all. And really, it's not actually going downhill because it's all staying the same. Everyone's the same. And so that's why people think we're living in an Orwellian future at the moment because of cameras, security footage, because of, social media and all these things. People are logging in all their details and we're always being watched and things like that. Obviously it's not as, dire as in George Orwell's 1984. And, I'm not going to go into the ending in case you haven't read it, but it is a worthwhile ending, and it is an ending that will stick with you for the rest of your life. Like I read it a few years ago and I still can't get that ending out of my head. It gives me the shakes to think about it. So George Orwell's 1984 takes the 5th spot. Taking the number 4 spot on this list, my favorite books of all time, is Bram Stoker's Dracula. This is oh my god. This has so many notable characters. We've got John Harker, we've got Mina, we've got Dr. Seward, we have Mr. Quincy, we have Van Helsing, one of the the coolest and craziest, funniest characters in all of literature. And so this is a good versus evil story. This book's terrifying, So he's this real estate agent who goes over and promotes properties in England to sort of foreigners who are looking to sort of migrate and move to England. And so he's traveling at the start of this book, he's traveling to Transylvania, and he's meeting with this man called Count Dracula, and he lives in this creepy castle in Transylvania atop this hill. And as he's traveling there, he's staying at these inns and he's taking trains and carriages and all these things. And as he's traveling there, everyone's warning him and everyone's doing the sign of the cross as he's going past him. And he starts going, "Why is everyone giving me the sign of the cross?" And everyone's saying, "Be careful up there." So he's starting to get a little bit spooked, and he arrives at the castle, and the Count is overly nice to him. And eventually he finds himself in sort of the guest bedroom, and he finds that he's actually being locked in there. And he starts getting more and more paranoid, and he's like, "I can't escape." And every time he brings up leaving, the Count says, "One more night. And eventually when he's locked in there, he looks out the window at one point, and he keeps seeing that Dracula's going out at nighttime. He's leaving, he's scaling the walls, he's going off on these mysterious journeys, he's looking behind his back at nighttime, and he thinks that there's some weird things going on. And then eventually he tries escaping on his own. He tries climbing out his window, Jonathan Harker, and then he finds himself finding ghouls, and he finds Count Dracula's coffin. It's a revolutionary book. This is my favorite horror book of all time. So this is taking the number 4 spot. This is Bram Stoker's 1897 Dracula. Taking the number 3 spot, we have Natsuo Kirino's Out. This is a Japanese modern classic, and it is insane. But the very premise of this book from the get-go is brutal. So Out follows 4 women. It's a sort of a study on middle class and lower class working women in Japan in the early 2000s. And it follows these 4 women who are sort of these colleagues at work. They work the night shift at a factory. And one woman, she's getting sort of abused by her husband when she comes back from her long night shift in the early hours of the morning. And one night, he's abusing her, and she snaps. She kills him. She strangles him. I think she strangles him with a belt. And then she, comes to the realization that he's dead. She freaks out, And so this woman, she goes back to the factory to these people that she's they're kind of friends, but they're more colleagues. They don't really hang out together or anything, but they briefly hang out before work and chat, have a cigarette together, whatever. And she goes up to her colleagues and she tells some of them, she goes, I've done this thing. I need some help to hide the body. And so she gets these 4 friends caught up in her murder of her husband, and they actually help her cut up the body and hide the body parts in garbage bags, and they put him in different locations of their town and all these things. And then eventually it becomes this big police chase, and it sort of goes back and forth between these POVs, these different characters. And it's an amazing, amazing study of working class women in Japan, because it's not, it is focused on this murder, but also there are some characters who get brought in to help her get rid of the body that really don't want to be there, but they know that if they report it, they're going to get in trouble for something else. They're going to get in trouble for the lie, because the lie is built up so much that it's too late essentially to sort of dob anyone in. And all the way through, it's a gripping read. You really cannot put this down, and I recommend this to everyone. People who like thrillers, people who don't like thrillers, you're going to love this. You're going to get something out of it. And again, this one is this beautiful vintage Japan series, and I love these covers. They're just awesome. They're just brilliant. And then just from this book, this made Natsuo Kirino one of my favorite authors. That led me to reading things like Grotesque. So she's amazing, and her writing style is amazing. Japanese translations come across really, really well. And so they're really easy to speed through, and the stories they come up with, I'm so glad that we have technology and people who can translate, foreign language books, because it's crazy. The Japanese stories are amazing. What they come up with is just brilliant. So that is Out by Natsuo Kirino. So for the number 2 spot on my top 10 favorite books of all time, we have Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This was actually the first classic that I read, in recent years that got me into all of this. When I was a teenager, because when I was a kid I read a lot. As a teenager I sort of dipped when I was going into high school, and a bit later last year I got really back into reading, and that's what started all of this channel, my collection, everything. And this was the first classic that I read for fun. Since high school, since being forced to overanalyze all these texts and stuff like that. And so I picked this up because it was actually mentioned in another Japanese crime book that I read, not Out. It was mentioned in that book, and I was like, I really need to read that, because everyone's always talking about Crime and Punishment. And I'm so glad I did. That sparked all of this love for classic books that I have. Crime and Punishment follows the character of Raskolnikov. And Raskolnikov is this poor, desolate man. And he has these delusional thoughts where he goes, how can I be great? How can I become one of the great people in history? And he keeps talking about people like Napoleon, specifically Napoleon Bonaparte. And he goes, well, the difference between me and Napoleon, the difference between great men like Napoleon and lesser men like me, is that they were able to make the jump between making a serious choice and doing something wild and doing something dangerous and risky, taking a risk. And somehow in his delusions, Raskolnikov thinks that to become a great man, he needs to commit a murder, because committing a murder is the hardest decision that a human can make, taking another person's life and risking everything. So in these delusional thoughts, he decides one day he's going to kill his landlady. And eventually he's hiding around the door while his landlady comes up to check on him, or check up on his house, check the property, and he jumps at her with an axe, and he kills her very brutally. And since reading this, I've fallen in love with Dostoevsky. I actually got a tattoo last night with a quote from Crime and Punishment in a little book here. And it's because his quotes are amazing. It says, "The really great men must have great sadness on earth." That quote means a lot to me. I got this little book here, but that was from this book here, actually. So that proves that this is one of my top favorite books. of all time. Dostoevsky, a 19th century writer, his ability to talk about mental health and psychology was so far ahead of its time. There is no other classic author that can talk about the human psyche like Dostoevsky. His exploration into how the mind actually works when crazy things happen, and decision making to make awful decisions. He goes into all of that. This is a book I urge everyone to read. This is one of the greatest classics of all time. I love Dostoevsky, and as a result of him, I've fallen in love with Russian literature. And I'm yet to read Tolstoy. I'm slowly getting through all of Dostoevsky's work. I've read Alexander Pushkin. I think as a European language, it wasn't too as complicated to translate into English. So we have been lucky enough to receive brilliant translations of Russian literature. So I urge you to read Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. So the moment you've all been waiting for, my favorite book of all time, my favorite standalone book of all time is Haruki Murakami's Norwegian Wood. This book changed my life. The way that Murakami is able to talk about what it means to be an adolescent and what it means to have the thoughts of a teenager, and how it is to grow up as a male in modern day times, and sort of the struggles that males actually go through, deep down, the sort of the hidden things that sort of we're told to repress. He talks about all these things, and that's why it's we can really connect with Murakami because of that. Norwegian Wood follows the story of Toru Watanabe, and he's on a plane in the first chapter, and he hears a song playing in the plane, and it's Norwegian Wood by the Beatles, and he's a fan of modern rock and classical music. This character, and when he hears this Beatles song, Norwegian Wood, it's a song that he heard when he was a kid, in a time in his life where he was forced to choose between two women in his life. One woman who was really, really struggling, and he had to choose between whether he was going to be sort of dragged down by someone else's struggles, or go off with someone else that was going to elevate him. And that other person is Midori. He meets Midori, and his life starts changing because of her. But his first love for Naoko, this character Naoko, who's she's currently in a mental institute because of some real mental health issues. He's forced to sort of choose. And Naoko, this girl, she's in this institute because she broke down as a person after her boyfriend, which was Toru's best friend Kizuki, committed suicide when they were sort of teenagers. And so it's a very melancholy book. It is hard to read because it follows some big themes like that. Some stuff that's really, really hard to read because of how modern day society for people our age, or teenagers, can be. Choosing between friends and being alone in the world, and having to choose between the right people, and also forgetting about people, moving on. There's a big theme of this book because at the start of the book, when he's thinking about these things that happened when he's on this plane, he doesn't have anyone. So these things that have happened in the past, these characters aren't around anymore. They're not in his life. And so it's just a really heart-wrenchingly beautiful story of coming of age and doing teenage things and doing stupid things, and having fun, being on your own, making friends, falling in love, falling out of love, all these things. All of Murakami's books, like since I've read this, I've read quite a few. All of his books go into these kind of themes, and that's why he's one of my favorite writers of all time. He really, really connects with me, and he talks about things that are really, they're hard because of the themes, but they're really easy to relate to because of the familiarity of these topics. For people, people my age. I don't think, you don't have to be a male to read this. Like, it's coming of age for male and female. It's just that he sort of writes, because his characters are usually male, he writes about the internal monologue and sort of struggles that, you know, you don't tell anyone. You know, we're sort of told to a lot of the time that we can't talk about these things. And lucky for me, I do have a strong support system of male and female friends that I am able to talk about those things with. But a lot of people in this day and age, you know, that a lot of guys are told that they can't talk about these things. And so reading this book, I feel like, is a really good way, you know, male or female, for you to start feeling comfortable with talking about those things. It's really, really important to have that strong support system. And this book really makes you contemplate, you know, who you're hanging around with and who your friends are, and whether or not they're actually good friends and whether or not they're going to be there for you. This book it's gorgeous. It's absolutely beautiful. It's like I said, it's gut wrenching. It's stunning. It's just, I really can't say how much this book means to me. Norwegian Wood, Murakami, that is my favorite standalone book of all time. Thank you so much for watching. This has been a really fun video for me to make. It's taken a little bit of reflection on some of these books, because some of them I have read quite a few years ago, so I'd forgotten sort of names of some characters and stuff. So if you hear me say, this character or this guy in some of them, that's why. But I've had a lot of fun because it's sort of reminded me of what literature has really impacted me and impacted my life. And changed me as a person, molded me as a person. And I give all my thanks to literature for me being able to really realize who I want to be as a person. And so I owe it to, these books that formed who I am today, and formed, me being able to start this channel and, creating dialogue and talking to you guys about these books. So I've had a lot of fun. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know what your favorite books are down below. Comment your top 10, comment your top 3, or even just your favorite book of all time. I would love to hear it. And as I always like to say, keep reading. Peace out.